I assume Anton's in Kiev then.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 5th episode in the SEO is AEO series. Today, we're looking at HTML5, Semantic HTML5, information architecture and accessibility with Kim Krause Berg, Jono Alderson, and Simon Cox. We were supposed to have Ross Tavendale on. He couldn't make it today. Jono kindly stepped in yesterday. I was really disappointed to lose Ross, but in fact, it turns out Jono's a super expert in information architecture. So we'll start with a little chat with Jono. I see that you started off talking in companies about information architecture. You were a web architect and an information architect. Is that right?
Yeah, way back in the day, I think before those were well-defined things. And I was convinced that it was a term I'd made up at the time to describe the kind of the things I was doing, which was around planning and designing structures and layouts and functionality of websites, and before handing them off to get built by developers. And I being fairly green, hadn't understood that this was an actual thing, so got a bit of a head start. And then when I was into the worlds of SEO and analytics and kind of agency world, yeah, it was really useful to have gone through that process. I'm also thinking of Ross and him not being much taller than Ross, so that will play out in our favour today.
You're taller than Ross?
Yeah, he's quite
we can't see that.
Oh, well, I have to take my word for it.
I believe you. The other thing I saw about you is, well, several things. Is one, you're endorsed by Larry Kim.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that. That's an interesting one.
He likes you, and you also do a site called Days of the Year. Now, I looked today, and it's Name Your Car Day, and International Day of Nonviolence, which I think is great. I noticed that since Google got smarter in 2014, you've had a big boost in traffic every January.
Yep, yeah, it's doing really well. So this has been my hobby for about a decade now. Today is World Farm Animals Day as well, and there are all these thousands of weird celebrations. The challenge is many of the people who run and organize them don't update and publish when they're going to do them each year until the beginning of the year. So in December, January, we do a massive admin spree and do all the research and update the site, and it gets stronger and stronger every year because of the way it's built. It's got great information architecture as well, obviously. So yeah, no, that's my weird little passion project. It's great.
Yeah, no, I was looking on Semrush, a little bit of a plug there for Semrush.
Yep.
Every January it jumps, the traffic jumps really, really. So it's because you do a cleanup.
Yep, pretty much, and keep
so
on top of it.
That's a really good lesson for us all to do a really good cleanup.
Spring cleaning, absolutely.
Spring cleaning at Christmas.
yeah. In advance of spring. Don't want to miss the peak season.
And last question to you, you're now with Yoast. You used to be with Distilled, and you say you're really excited about Yoast. Why?
Yoast is awesome. We were just chatting before we started. It's really meaningful. It's really big. I get to play with Wordpress, which powers something like 32% of the web now, and the changes and improvements we're making for SEO, for performance, for IA, impact a huge chunk of the web, which is pretty awesome. And our whole mission is, how do we improve everything? How do we make it all better? How do we empower everyone to succeed? So it's wonderful to have that level of kind of altruism, but power and influence. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've been using Yoast for years, and I've never looked at it quite like that. As you say, if 30% of the world is using WordPress and 20% of that world is using Yoast, that's an incredible influence. Yeah, great stuff. Thanks. Anyway, thank you for stepping in, Jono. It was really, really kind of you. I'm really pleased to have you on board because you actually know what information architecture is. Going on to Simon, I see from your history is that you've always been in graphic design, page composition, publishing since 1995, if I know correctly.
Actually, the graphic design stuff started in '88.
So it's kind of ironic that I'm asking you to talk about Semantic HTML5, which takes HTML out of the design and starts to give content roles instead of representing the design. Do you feel bad about that?
No, not at all. Things have moved on since 1988, since print. But that is my background. For many years, I did print layouts and stuff. So when CSS came along, I was straight in there. I understood exactly what was going on because we used style sheets in Quark Express, etc., for laying out large documents, what have you.
Yeah, right. Quark Express. My ex-wife used that a lot in the late '80s, early '90s.
I still use it.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
That's good. Good bit of software.
We also saw yesterday that you live on a race course, which I think is the brilliantest place in the world to live.
Yeah, it's fun. It's something to watch. So literally out of looking out here, I can see a race course. So, yeah.
And okay, and with the race course, we can now move on to Kim, who has a horse who she's going to send on holiday to see Simon. You're muted. Great.
Sorry, I'm never going to get used to that. But yes, I have a 7-year-old off-track thoroughbred racehorse who is a stakes winner. And but he's retired because he has a sesamoid injury, so I get to take care of him now.
Can I ask what his name is?
His official name, his jockey name is Germaniac.
Okay.
We call him Manny.
Oh, Manny. I like Manny. It's the mammoth in Ice Age.
And he's like an overgrown puppy dog. He's got a lot of character, personality.
And you've been in the web, sorry to completely switch subjects, it's not that the horse doesn't interest me, but you've been in the web since 95 too. And you've always been into usability, testing, and information architecture. So you're perfect for this episode.
I try. Yeah, I started out as an SEO and a web designer and just kind of evolved.
And your company is called Create PC?
Oh, no, well, it was back then. That's how I started. But now it's Creative Vision Web Consulting. Okay. I retired. I still own the domain, but I kind of retired Create PC.
And it's still your Twitter handle?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because so many people know me by that. So I kind of had to hang on to it. By the way, I want to mention, I used to use Quark. And for the 88, do you remember WordPerfect? Spellbinder?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're showing our age, but yeah.
Yeah, shit. Oh dear, sorry, I didn't mean to swear. Right, we're going to move on with the episode now that I've managed to swear once. That happens at least once every episode. We had a Twitter exchange, and Grant Simmons was talking about answer engine optimization to a question from Jeannie Hill, are we question engineers? And he said, question engineering is about creating, delivering the best content, the best answer, defined as best format, best delivery, best satisfying of user needs based on an understanding of their query, intent, and context. We're aspiring to be Google. I think that's a great quote. On to the episode itself. We're looking at the blue screen where we show everybody's Twitter handle. Please do feel free to reach out to individual people who are talking, to Jono, to Simon, or to Kim. And please do feel free to ask questions. We're here to answer them at the end. We'll have a 20-minute maybe Q&A where we can ask these experts questions on these topics. You're allowed to go a little bit off topic if you want to, but please do feel free to ask questions. So anybody who's seen any of these episodes at all knows that I'm really in love with relevancy, understanding, and credibility. The first part of this webinar is going to look really at understanding, and we'll start with Semantic HTML5, and it's really not fashionable. I have not yet had a client who had Semantic HTML5 correctly implemented. They all think they do it well, and they all think it's boring, and they all think that it's, because it's from 2011, it's kind of now out of date or not interesting or so simple, it's not worth bothering about. I did this for an article on Semrush. It's really simple but full representation, of Semantic HTML5 to structure your pages. So the first question is to Simon. It's changing divs to semantic tabs. It's incredibly simple and incredibly effective. Can you explain this example? I'll go back to it so we can have a quick look. Simon, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just fill in for the background first. And the reason that developers traditionally use divs is because they moved from table layouts where they could do stuff to divs so that they could do layouts with CSS to actually control the layout of the page. From a visual point of view, that works fantastic. But from so that's only the visual layer. From other layers, it doesn't work at all. So HTML5 has brought us the ability to semantically describe areas of a web page. And as you can see in here, some very easy to spot ones. Header, that's a header. It's semantic. It's meant to be easy. We've got a footer at the bottom as well, which is the footer part, which shows the footer bits, and also the nav. At the top, shows basic navigation. So the header will hold things like logos, call to actions, NAPs, etc. And nav as well. The footer will hold things like, well, whatever you want to put, colophon, bits, pieces around your site, possibly secondary navigation, etc. But they're not the main part of the content. The content main part sits under the main, as you can see there. We also have articles, sections, and the sites. The main wraps around your main piece of content, and it really can tell assistive tools and crawlers where your main piece of content sits. Articles, if you've got a single page article in there, that'll cover the whole thing. If you have a page where you've got multiple articles, you can have several articles on there, and a good example of that would be a listing of articles, or like a blog listing, etc. And you can have many in there. There is an argument amongst the HTML5 glitterati that you can have H1s in each article when you've got a list of them. But then my argument there is actually you should have a H1 saying this is a list of articles, and then they should all be H2s. So from an SEO point of view, I always say that, but there are people that will argue, but never mind. In each article, we have sections, and splitting these sections up, it really depends upon your article, how long it is and what it's got in it. But if you split your article up with headings, H2s, H3s, etc., you can section that off into bite-sized chunks. That makes the content much more easy to understand, both from a human point of view, although humans aren't going to see the sections, etc. But from a crawler's point of view, it'll understand the content far better. The sides in there as well. Sides can be inside an article or outside an article. I don't know what they're called, not called outsides, I suppose they're asides. But again, they're relevant to either the article, which case they're inside, or maybe to the site, etc. Which case they'll be outside the article. There are some other semantic tags. I'll just go through this. There's details, which at the moment that toggles stuff and could or could not be read by Google. I need to do some testing on that. Summary, which is details, kind of title. There's figure and fig caption. You'll see that a lot. Mm-hmm. That gets used a lot because fig caption sits inside the figure tag and allows you to put a caption on a photograph, which is very, very handy. There wasn't anything like that before HTML5. Mark, which I've never used, it highlights text, might be used for it. Video, obviously that's where film comes into it. That's one for Heather. That uses native browser player. And those items also give semantics around your content.
Okay, so that's really great. What I heard there, I mean, what I liked about that is that you're saying one H1, no more arguing about it. One H1 and the rest is H2s. I really like that because I've been debating with myself for a couple of years now. You've just made my decision for me, and I'm incredibly happy. The other thing is that whereas divs are design, sections, articles, navigation, footers, headers is all about semantics, all about the role that chunk of content plays in the page. I found it, in my experience, to be incredibly powerful, incredibly useful, and very much underused. And you were saying, Simon, a missed opportunity. Now on to this one, which is something else I think is incredibly underrated, is tables, OL, UL, and headings, which have all come back into fashion because of position 0. But the misuse of headings and the hierarchy that can give within a page, we often think about the hierarchy of a site, and we often fail to correctly look at the hierarchy of our page with the H1s. Simon, give us a rundown of this one.
It's incredibly simple, but so underutilized and misused. We've got H1s to H6s, and they nest inside each other. So you have one H1, you can have then multiple H2s under that, and under each H2 you can have H3s, under each H3 H4s, etc. I can't remember the last time I saw a site with a H5 and H6, but there should they ever be needed, and maybe more academic circles they're going to be useful.
If I can cut in there just to give a plug to Yoast, I read an article where he said if you're using H5s and H6s, you should create a new page.
Yeah, you probably should, shouldn't you? Exactly, but they're there. I mean, I always style them up in CSS, but I've never used them. It takes a couple of characters, but by by doing this, by actually splitting the stuff up into your headings, you're really making things a lot easier for the assistive technology to understand what's under each heading. And you have the possibility of actually getting a featured snippet if you've got decent headings with decent content underneath, and you will find featured snippets that have literally gone through the page and pulled out the headings in a list, maybe of items to do something. So in that case, that's a really good argument for doing it and actually marking stuff up correctly. What we see most of the time, though, is headings being used because of the size they are, how visually they look. So whilst when you do a CSS class for H1 throughout the site and they want this size, people will keep applying that. They don't think about the structure of the content. They think about the visual appeal of the site and how it looks, etc. That's a really difficult one to get away from.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I have so many clients who say, well, I'm not using the H2s because they're too big. So I'm using an H3, and you're going, but yeah, all right, it's too big. Get you guys to change the CSS, or the people who are coding to change the CSS, because it should be an H2. And if it's not an H2, you're miscommunicating. And Google won't be able to pull out those lists you talked about, present them as a position 0. I mean, you're blocking, you're creating problems for Google, you're miscommunicating, and you're doing more harm than you are good. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And to go on about tables and ordered lists and unordered lists as well, and tables dropped out of fashion very quickly when CSS came along because of table layouts, etc. But they're absolutely brilliant for data, and that's where you should be putting them. And for HTML5, there was some different way of describing a table, so it actually got a little bit more complicated. But you can put the table footer; you need to put it in above the rest of the content in there. But it describes data really, really well. So if you've got data on your page, put it in a table. Make sure it's in a table.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a table; it's a bit like MySQL or Excel. I mean, it's a presentation of data in a structured format, which is brilliant for Google.
Yeah,
super stuff. Sorry,
I just want to finish off with that. The biggest problem we do have, though, is as SEOs, is when you go and work on a site, it's already normally been built, probably from a template, and the developers don't think anything about this stuff. And it's very, very difficult to go back and refactor something. So my biggest tip is, if you can, get in at the start of a project and set some standards and start with and say, right, everything's got to validate. That's not popular at all, especially amongst business people, because it's extra cost. But I'm sure we'll hear from Kim as well, something along those lines later.
Yeah, so I mean, Dave was saying last week that looking at schema markup when you're actually building the site is incredibly important and often undervalued. And here we're saying HTML5, getting it right from the start. And both of them, once you start making mistakes or you start misrepresenting, you accumulate, and the whole thing exaggerates itself. So getting it right at the start is phenomenally important. Thank you, Simon. That was brilliant. We're now looking at information architecture, which is fashionable. This is really trendy at the moment, but for me at least, it's not always clear what it is. Luckily, we've got Jono who knows exactly what it is, and we're going to look at this from a point of view of relevancy to the question and understanding for Google. I found this really nice diagram or picture or graphic from Murray Thompson, who I don't know. And the definition, I think it comes from Moz, it comes from Rand Fishkin, using digital design to create semantic structures that will help people engage with your message. I think that's brilliant, but it doesn't really mean that much. So what I understand is IA is all about engagement. AEO is increasingly, answer engine optimization is increasingly about engagement too. Is this an incredibly happy marriage? Jono?
I think so. That's easy, isn't it? So right. What is IA? So we were talking earlier before we started that it's one of those very big, broad terms that means nothing and everything at the same time. So I think my best stab at explaining it is that it's the stage that happens before design. It's when you know that you've got a set of objectives and you're going to build a website or an app or print something to achieve that, the stage where you go, okay, what does this need to have? How do those things need to work? What's the relative priority of the pieces? How does it get interacted with? What happens then? All of the bits that happen before you start coloring things in and writing text. And you'll have some ideas about what those bits will look like, but it's very much the planning stage where you design what the thing is, not how the thing looks. So that is very much about engagement, or at least planning to achieve engagement and to make sure that you build something that's inherently engaging. I think one of the reasons it's come back into fashion and for a long time wasn't is that historically there's been a lot of friction between SEO and information architecture. So I've certainly been through lots of meetings where the SEO guys have said, we need lots of text on the page because Google likes lots of text. And the information architecture guys have said, no, we need big hero images to display the brand message and to tell people where they are. And those two things didn't really fit very well together. And then similarly, the SEO guys might say, I don't know, we need really meaningful button labels so that people can understand exactly where they're clicking through to. Whereas the information architecture guys might say, well, no, we need, for the sake of consistency, we need to say read more on every button. And neither of those scenarios are really good. Then I think what's also really interesting is that there's been friction between both of those disciplines and the conversion rate guys. So in the same conversation, the CRO guys are saying, we need to remove all that long text because it decreases conversion rate, but the SEO guys want the traffic. And they're saying, we should remove this big image that the CRO guys, so the IA guys want, because it slows the page down. So there's all this conflict between these disciplines. Increasingly, all that is stopping, and it's all the same thing. What we're talking about is a set of people, yes, with different skills and different focuses, but ultimately who are trying to make better web pages. And Google is getting smart enough, and users are familiar enough with websites and the internet and how it works to want good, fast pages with a sensible amount of text that describes the thing they want, that looks good and feels good as they use it. And all those disciplines are now working towards the same goals. I think in that case, what IA is the planning and bringing together of all of those people and all of those objectives to make sure that what you're doing is going to achieve all those goals. And as Simon says, you have to do that right at the beginning. You can't design the thing and then try and get it right from an IA perspective, or you can't write the stuff and then try and get the framework right to house it. And it's all going to be part of the very initial planning process. I think one of the reasons that doesn't happen very often is that people tend to build things, websites, that reflect their internal business structures. So if I'm a fashion brand, I have men's clothes, which divides into trousers and then jeans and then sizes, etc. Because in the physical world, that's how I need to store and organize my stock and my proposition. I need a system that allows me to navigate through that analog system. So when people search for a specific thing on the internet or visit a website, why are you making them go through that process? We have an opportunity to design and architect something that's a much better fit for the way that they want to behave and the things that the net allows us to achieve. So you could develop systems of navigation that allow them to find and get to things exactly how they want. So for example, horizontal classification becomes possible. So show me all the things which are blue from an IA perspective is exactly the same level of complexity as show me all the things which are jeans. So suddenly you can untie yourself from the constraints of the real world and your physical business and start considering, how do I structure my site and my pages and my content in a way that allows people to find what they need? So you can throw away the rule book and you can really start from scratch and say, ignore all convention of how websites can usually look, how they work, how they're structured. What do our customers need? What do our audiences need? And how do we structure our information and our content and our functionality to meet that? So I think there's a really big realization that you don't need to build a big hierarchical website with a homepage and a big navigation and all your products categorized. You can start from scratch and you can say, how do I get all these people working together to meet consumer goals? So I think it's a wonderful marriage, and it's only going to get closer. And the people who succeed will be the people who really meld SEO, IA, conversion rate optimization, accessibility into one, I hate to use the word, one holistic discipline where you just pre-design better stuff. And obviously throughout all of that, you HTML5 the heck out of it, you add meaning throughout all of it, and you build something super awesome. So,
yeah, sure, great. So that was brilliant. I was incredibly complete, and I now get a good idea of what IA is. What I do here, though, is it's a marriage made in heaven.
Oh yeah.
And also what I hear is what Simon was saying, what Dave was saying last week about schema markup, and I think what Kim's probably going to say about accessibility is getting all this done in the planning stage is actually reasonably easy. Once you get to the site being online, it becomes much more complicated.
Yep.
I also love the idea that, and I have this problem with my clients, is they present things from their point of view. And I continually tell them, like, you need to look at the point of view of your users or your potential clients and present it from their point of view. And that's something that's coming, I think. But it's pretty difficult. It's tough going.
It is. I think there's one key change as well, which is that everybody builds their website the wrong way up. They assume that people enter the homepage, get a nice brand message, and then navigate down and through. But the rise of search engines and social media platforms has turned that inside out. People arrive 5 levels deep on a product page or an information page. So when you're doing your IA phase and your planning phase, you need to understand that people need to be able to navigate up and through as easily as down. People are random and unpredictable. So your whole website, the way you IA that needs to encompass that.
Yeah, and I mean, telling your client, when you see this product page, which is 5 levels down or 4 levels down, imagine that your client or the potential client, the prospect, has no idea who you are, and they've just been looking for a pair of blue jeans, as you said. They arrive on the page. They need some context. You need to give them context. And the idea, once again, with meta titles and meta descriptions, they're saying they're all too similar. And you're saying, but you have to realize that the same person isn't going to see all your 150,000 meta titles all at once. So
yeah.
And it's important to be very clear and to give context. So that's a really great answer. Thank you very much. The next one is a bit trickier, I think. Categorization and classification. Maintaining consistent, effective taxonomies and ontologies. I can't remember where I found that. I think it was on the same site as the graphic image earlier on. I thought that was brilliant, and it reminded me of a knowledge graph. Now, how close is that association? Am I a bit mad, a bit obsessed, or is there an association there?
No, you're spot on. So most websites will have different types of content, and on a bog standard out the box WordPress site, for example, those are pages and posts and categories and tags. And those are different types of things, and they're mechanisms for sorting and organizing your content. So the most commonly you have categories and tags. So categories are vertical, they're clothes, and tags are horizontal, so they're colors. And what happens typically is many websites hire an intern to categorize all their content, and they make a mess. So they'll have a blog post about something niche with 30 different tags, each of which will only be used once. And if you imagine that as a filing cabinet or a database, it just doesn't make sense. What we're trying to achieve is some kind of system which allows us to connect things in a meaningful way and to presumably allow end users to navigate through those and say, okay, show me the cheapest thing by color or the best thing by category, and those kinds of functions. What happens also is that categories often stagnate or they're misused. So not only will businesses use categories to reflect their kind of internal structure, but they'll also do things like use sale as a category. So things that are on sale go in a sale category. Now, that's not what a category is. A category is a different type of thing. A sale is a grouping of things which have a certain set of attributes. And so when you're going through the IA pre-design phase, not only do you need to think, how are these pages structured and where do the things live? You need to think, okay, this box is a promotion. What is a promotion? What properties does it have? What attributes does it have? Does it need to connect to other entities in a meaningful way on the front end and the back end of the database? And you need to design the schema of these things. And then, yeah, very quickly, what you're designing is graphs of things. And you start saying, how do I structure and manage this optimally? Is a product a link to a post, or is it a different thing? And you design that hierarchy of information. So what you very quickly find that you're doing is building a system that identifies all the different types of stuff on your site and how they interrelate. And then it becomes very, very easy to do things like the design and the rest of the IA and the SEO and the accessibility, because you understand what the things you're working with are. You're not building one page at a time and one element at a time. You defined a set of rules. One of the ways we talk about this at Yoast is we talk about cornerstone content. And this is as a way of thinking that makes it really easy to approach this sort of stuff. You very simply identify the most important pages on your site, and then you make sure that all of your navigation, all of your in-content links, all of your taxonomies, all of your categories work to shepherd visitors and searchers and search engines to these pages. And if you spend an hour every week going, what are my most important pieces of content? And does my navigation reflect this? Does my internal linking reflect this? Does my tagging reflect this? And just tweaking and updating that and refining it and maybe merging a couple of pages here and there and adding or removing links here and there, you find yourself very quickly creating a website that looks and feels like a knowledge graph, which is something Google is really into because they want to understand everything about what you have and everything about how your content works. It's something that works well for users, for accessibility. It just makes sense. It's quite hard, again, to do that retrospectively, but if you design it up front, a couple of hours a week to maintain it is more than enough.
Oh, okay. I really like the idea of saying, like, spend an hour a week or 2 hours a week just looking at what we are presenting, and also the idea of attributes, properties, and links between entities. Incredibly powerful. I know that Gennaro from last week would have been incredibly keen to have chatted with you about that. So thank you. That was brill. I'm terribly keen on your IA explanation. It's much clearer for me now, and I think I might actually spend a couple of hours a week now looking at it. Moving on to accessibility with Kim, we have, for me, this is anti-fashion, fashionable. So we had the unfashionable, the fashionable, now we're anti-fashion. So Kim's got the anti-fashion, very much about delivery. How do we deliver content to people? How is that content accessible? And Kim, a couple of weeks ago, gave me a new look into that. I was thinking about alt tags, very simplistic stuff for sight impaired people. And she gave me the point that accessibility is for everybody, and it's how you access the data, the information on the page. That's incredibly important, whatever your status, whether you're partially sighted or you're physically impaired in some way. So I looked at it and came up with this little list. There's only 5 things on it, and I ran out of ideas. Accessibility for an answer engine world, for whom and in what environments. You can all read that, and I think Kim can probably add something to that. For whom, what environments? Kim, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's a little outdated the way we view accessibility. We tend to look, think that it's for blind people or deaf who needed assistive technology like JAWS. That's like 15 years old. Today today we refer to it as assistive and inclusive. And the reason being is that accessibility includes an enormous, like, I forget, like billions of people around the world, beginning with sight impaired, sure. People who forget their glasses, yes. But it's also the mental state, the emotional state. If you are using assistive technology through voice, are you upset? Are you intoxicated? Are you medicated? And as far as things to consider with web design, ADD, ADHD, those sliders and things that are zipping in and out of the web page and the forms that pop up, people who are easily distracted have trouble with the intrusive things that we tend to do. Let's see. We don't really like to use the term disabled. Sometimes a disability is temporary. You might have a temporary injury to your hand, which means that you can't use your mouse or the keyboard, but you can tab. You might be able to use your tab key. So accessibility includes older people, cognition, how much information we remember. And that is something that I think SEOs and content writers and developers don't always consider. We write for search engines and so many words per page, but if we write something longer, or we go page stop, or we're inserting ads in between the content, that really messes with people who have short attention spans or memory issues or cognitive, things like that. There's all things that you need to consider, during the design phase. The environment is huge, and also is the computer device and the technology that we use. And those are things that we, Simon was saying, Kim's going to jump in on this. Yes, marketers need to be in at the first discussion where, with the developers, with everybody else, the developers, the designers, the stakeholders, the content writers, to help flesh out who they're writing for and the devices that their information is going to be accessed with.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I love that. What I remember, one thing that did stand out was assistive and inclusive.
Yeah.
And I think that really says it. And as I said earlier on, you've really brought a broader view of what accessibility is for me. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's incredibly important that we all look at the idea of accessibility, not only from the point of somebody who's handicapped or somebody who's sight impaired, but also all of us and on different devices. And accessibility on telephones is not the same as accessibility on a voice assistant, is not the same as on a computer. And we tend to forget that. And it would be great if we got a better vision of that. And the other thing is that as we're, for all of these three topics, Semantic HTML5, IA, and accessibility, we need to get this done at the start of the development process and not try and shoehorn it in during the life of the site. Brilliant stuff. Next question, of course, is what tactics? Obviously, it's great to say all that. It's wonderfully theoretical, but what tactics can marketers implement to serve the needs and situations you just mentioned?
Education. I really, education's key. The more a marketer knows about accessibility, the better that they're able to contribute. And also they can do their own testing as well. There's on my website, I have a blog, and it's called The User Is Out There. And there's an accessibility category there. And in one of the articles, and I can post a link, is a set of the tools. Like there's like the Chrome web developer tools. It has AXE, A-X-E in there that performs a site audit. So if you're going to be, performing audits anyway, just throw some AXE in there. Marketers can do accessibility testing. Even if they don't know how to implement the code, they can get an idea of what accessibility is all about and what's, breaking the guidelines. The other thing is to be sure that you understand the guidelines and the regulations for the country that you're targeting. If you're global, you have to consider the guidelines and regulations for other countries like the UK and the USA, and they're different. And if you are targeting mobile users, which more and more websites are, Apple and Android, the accessibility tools that are built into it are different. They're designed differently. They're used differently. I would say that most marketers, when approached with the idea of accessibility, don't understand. That's like the big thing. And so education is definitely like the most important thing.
Yeah, I love that. Getting the accessibility in place, actually saying to a developer, just make this accessible, doesn't make any sense. You need, as a marketer, to understand what it is you're trying to make accessible, where you're trying to make it accessible, and to whom you're trying to make it accessible. Do your testing, figure it out, then go to them and say, this is what we need to do for these different devices, for these different people in different environments. I had a quick question, sorry, for Jono. You're the super WordPress expert. How far does WordPress go to actually covering these bases? Sorry, it just occurred to me, it's a new question, sorry.
It depends very much on the theme you're using, and if most people are using off-the-shelf themes that cost them maybe $20, the reason they're often $20 is they don't have a huge amount of depth to them. Yeah, so it very much depends how much work you put in. There are some plugins you can use to kind of paper over some of the cracks, but again, this is a scenario where you really need to bake it in from the ground up. And those are difficult questions, right? It's not, is it accessible, cross or tick? It's, of all the possible audiences accessing it on any possible device with any possible set of needs, have we considered that? And so we're doing a whole load of work on Yoast.com at the moment, looking at color contrast ratios, for example. And we're still not there yet. There's a million little things we need to do. And I think it's not a binary thing. So it's reasonable out the box, but pay a lot of attention to how much work your theme author has put into caring and trying that way. And again, a $20 theme is never going to be great.
Yeah, sure.
Jason, if I could point out one tip, if I could give one tip, and it's something that I see companies do all the time. They copy what other people are doing. And I'm always saying to my clients, they're not doing it right. So if you're copying them, you're also doing it wrong. So it goes back to education as well, and truly understanding who your target market is. And I believe that that's a really big part of the marketer's job.
Yeah, no, I love that point. My clients say, "Oh, this is how they're doing it, therefore it must be right." And no, they're doing it wrong. It isn't because they're doing it like that that you should be doing it like that. And education is a brilliant word to be using, because it is all about it. It's educating our marketers, it's educating the developers, it's educating our clients, depending on what position we're in. Brilliant stuff. I'm terribly keen on this one. And like the last episode, I'm going to have to watch it all back again to actually trying to get all this in my brain.
I'll just jump in there as well, Jason.
Yeah,
I've had a lot of trouble in the past trying to persuade departments, businesses to actually implement accessibility. They're just not interested.
Right.
So one of the techniques I've used to really encourage them is to point out what the biggest blind user of their websites is, and that's Google. I get very interested then.
Brilliant one. Yeah, great. I love that. I'll do that next time I'm with a client. Right, the last furlong, because we're in a horsey environment for both Kim and for Simon. Last furlong is position 0 profile. It started off in the second episode. We have these 5 points: knowledge graph first, then best top 10 results. Answer algorithm on top of a search algorithm, that was Eric Enge. Ultimate source of truth, David Bain. User signals are a crucial signal, Rebecca Sentence. And schema as a foundation, which was everybody from last week. This is going to be interesting. Simon, HTML5 and position 0. What can HTML5 bring to the position 0 theory?
Well, if you don't mark up your content correctly, I can pretty much guarantee you will not be in position 0.
Brilliant.
That's the first one. But there's other bits and pieces as well. So another little tip there is, if you're doing an order list with how to do something, make sure it's more than 5 points. Because if you have more than 5, then you get a nice little link at the bottom saying more. And then that'll take it to your site rather than people just staying on Google and reading the stuff. So make stuff up to make sure it's more than 5 bullet points, or headings if they happen to pick up that from headings as well. But there's also what I haven't mentioned earlier was about semantic tagging. People quite often use the I tag for italics and the B tag for bold. They're old, they're still around, but don't use the EM tag for emphasizing stuff and the strong tag for emboldening it. Both of those will be picked up by voice searches, and emphasis in a voice search is quite different to what it is on screen. So somebody will emphasize it. If you just put an italic tag in, they won't emphasize it in a voice answer.
Yeah, so I mean, you're looking at accessibility again. I mean, this idea, so it's reading it to me, and EM is not the same as I, and strong is not the same thing as B. B is graphic. You'd use that in Quark. Strong is HTML5, which actually changes the way that the text is read back to you. Brilliant stuff. So next up, I can't remember who it is. Oh, it's Jono. Great stuff. Information architecture. What does that bring to our ongoing profile?
I have 3 answers to this, so I'll be super quick. The first is that if you're familiar with WordPress, I know. There's a big change coming to the core WordPress editor. It's called Gutenberg, and it changes the way that content is written and structured within your site. The big impact of this is that at the moment, everything is about pages. I have a web page, which might appear as a result in Google in position 0. In a world of Gutenberg, everything is blocks. So a paragraph is a block, a recipe is a block, a list within that recipe is a block of blocks. Suddenly we live in a world where Google can extract bits of pages, and all my position 0 stuff suddenly becomes block based. And it's not about who has the best page with the best markup, it's about who has the best blocks. So we need to start thinking in smaller units of content, and obviously all those blocks need to be constructed out of rich semantic HTML5 and interlinked, etc. So that's huge. Definitely be thinking, if you're on WordPress or Drupal as well, about how you start thinking below the page level. Other really interesting thing is I was talking to one of the people from Bing the other day, and they've rolled out some really cool stuff. Bing's the other search engine, if you've not heard of that. If you search for questions which don't have a single simple answer, like is cholesterol bad for me is one of their examples, they show conflicting feed results. So they'll have in one position 0 listing, this is why it's good for you, this is why it's bad for you. What's really interesting about that is you can be both of those results. And then you need schema, then you need rich structured markup. You need it all to be in HTML5. You need the JSON-LD. But if you get everything really rich and semantic and block-based, suddenly you can become the source of truth for both sides of an argument, which if you position yourself well is obviously great for visits, great for conversion, etc. And then very, very quickly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention AMP. If you're not familiar with AMP, I'm sure everyone is, but it's a new type of HTML which extends HTML5, which is very heavily backed by Google. It's ostensibly a new type of HTML markup designed to speed up the mobile web. It is very fast. It is very politically contentious, depending on your opinions on Google and their motivations. But this is the next generation of HTML5. And if Google, to get faster and better, needs to really be able to understand things like what's the main content of this page about, and is this a heading, or what's this image about? This is the new set of language that they're really keen on using to understand that. So at the very least, go out and learn about how it works. They're pushing it very hard because many people have not adopted HTML5. And if they have, they've done it badly and made a bad job of it. So by enforcing a very strict set of guidelines on what types of tags are allowed and saying these must be accessible, they must be fast, they must be mobile friendly, they're reducing people's creativity, but they're making a faster web which does achieve many of these standards. And that's a really, really good ticket into the position 0 results in that kind of area. So
yeah, so you're saying AMP both fast and accessible, which is the great advantage, and bringing us back to our basics is actually not such a bad thing at the end of the day. No. I really like that. I really like the idea for Gutenberg because it comes back to the printed press from centuries ago and saying, yeah, we're looking at blocks of content, and instead of looking at pages, we look at blocks within pages, and pages become blocks that contain other blocks, and they become blocks within the overall. I could go on for hours like that. Brilliant stuff. Absolutely perfect. Next one, last question on position 0 is Kim, accessibility in position 0. What can accessibility bring to this theory?
My biggest thing is to research where, what, why, when, and how people ask questions. And that includes the devices that they use, where they are, their environment, and what accessibility, is. And marketers they already develop user personas, well, throw in some accessibility ones in there. That's something that we just don't even think about. What does an older person need to know to be able to use the website? Ask for test results and from developers during the development, and before production or after production. If a marketer has access to information, they can kind of warn ahead, like a scout, ahead, like, hey, wait a minute. We're not going to reach this person or this target market or this country or the person using this device. And if you are typing questions or asking questions like from Alexa or Hey Google, what kind of questions does a special needs person ask? What terms do they use? I think to myself, okay, hardware store closest to me. Well, that's for somebody who can see and walk and whatever. How often do people type in, where is the hardware store that has self-checkout or handicap parking or, the extra some things near me? They might actually be willing to drive a little bit for, can they even get there? And then the final thing is definitely pay attention to what's happening as far as the legal side, because companies have been getting sued, and this is actually increasing. And I know in the United States and in some states, the judges are ruling in favor of accessibility. So it really, really, really is important.
Yeah, so it's really a subject that's coming more and more to the fore. And in terms of actually presenting information to people, Google needs to understand it. So you need the HTML5, you need the IA, and you also need, and interestingly enough, self-service checkout. All these attributes that you can communicate through schema markup I also heard from Bill Slawski that Google are now looking at reviews to say, the self-checkout was great, so they now know that there's self-checkout at this place. And for me, that's incredibly interesting, very powerful. Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. We can now say thank you to all three of you. We've come to the end of the episode, but please do hang around. Please do ask your questions, because we've got another 15 minutes to answer some questions. Big thank you to Simon. Big thank you to Jono. Big thank you to Kim. We're going to move on to the questions, and I've actually got one, which, I saw Jaws, and that makes me think of obviously sharks, because I've got no imagination. I've got no idea what it is. Kim, tell me what it is, please. Can you tell me what it is?
Yeah. Am I unmuted? I can't even tell. Oh, yeah, there I am. Yeah. JAWS is assistive technology, basically. It's used mostly by blind people. It's a screen reader, and it's used to read text and voice it back to people. One of the best examples or demonstrations I ever saw was Matt Bailey stood up at a search engine optimization or search engine strategies conference, and he showed the audience what an optimized page sounds like and reads back through JAWS. And the alt information wasn't there, the keyword stuffing was there, it was amazing. And he had everybody in stitches laughing, but it was the perfect demonstration of what not to do for people who are listening to our web pages. So that's what JAWS does.
Okay, I suspected that if you actually had a screen reader, as a sighted person, you had a screen reader read out the rubbish we've been putting in the SEO, that it would be a pretty good laugh. So I'm going to go and check out JAWS and see if I can have a good laugh at myself. Somebody else asked, after you've installed your correct HTML5, Simon, or a correct IA, Jono, how long does it take for Google to actually pick up on that and understand it and start delivering the better results that you would hope for?
Well, no different from anything else, is it? If your site's already indexed and it's getting crawled a lot, then pretty quickly. If it's not, if you've got a robot's text that's completely wrong, then it's not going to get crawled at all. So yeah, it depends. It always depends, doesn't it?
Yeah. Have you got all the other millions of things which might potentially be preventing your performance right? And maybe this is the one magic bullet that pushes you over the border of this is completely broken to this is now just about okay. Likelihood not. And if you've got that level of challenge with your fundamental market, you've probably got other problems with, I don't know, speed, security, other areas. It's definitely worth looking at. Simon, actually, you mentioned earlier, I was going to bring this up, but I forgot, validation and code quality. And Google repeatedly and frequently say having valid HTML markup is not a ranking factor. Fine. But it's harder to parse broken markup. Assistive technologies like JAWS will struggle and will fail. Third-party kit and like Cloudflare and CDNs will struggle. And I wonder if actually there's probably a huge correlation between people who don't have that microscopic focus on code quality and validation compared to the people who also aren't doing great on HTML5, on great IA, and great accessibility. And they're so closely linked. So I wonder if we all just ought to be preaching and saying, you know what, chase after valid markup, because when you've got that level of focus, you'll get everything else right.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at that in schema markup last week. Whether it's a ranking factor or not is kind of maybe a moot point, just simply in the fact that the more you give yourself the capacity to communicate clearly with Google in a way that Google understands and is confident. I really like the word confident. It's confident that it is understood, the better you will perform. So it may or may not be a direct ranking factor, but it's certainly a help. And this whole idea, if we look back at my trio of relevancy, communication, and credibility, it's that understanding part. If Google is sure it is understood, it's much more likely to consider you as being one of the answers. Last question, or not the last question, if somebody else wants to ask one, but the Gutenberg thing, you mentioned that pretty quickly, and I had a quick look, and I know that he's a printer. What is Gutenberg exactly? Jono, you've muted.
Oh, I just muted myself. So at the moment, when you write or edit a page in a WordPress editor, it's a big white box, and you have a conventional text editor which allows you to bold things, to add an image, etc. But that's a bit clunky. It's a bit old school. Gutenberg is all based on blocks. So you still just go into this content area and just write content, but you can say, this is a heading. and it makes it a heading as a block, and then you can say this is a paragraph, this is a recipe, and it's a slightly more visual, interactive way of constructing content. It's similar to some content builder tools that are out there. If you've used Medium at all, it's very similar to writing in Medium. It's just a bit more modern. I did see there were a couple of questions that came in about will this replace page builders in WordPress. It might replace some of them might adapt and update, many of them aren't quite ready yet, but it's essentially an attempt to make the editing experience much more modern and much more fluid, and it enables this sort of cool stuff with, I want to specifically mark this thing up as a recipe. And in today's world, that's quite hard, but when it's all made out of blocks, it's super easy.
And that's becoming a core part of WordPress, so you're obviously completely obsessed by it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's 30% of the web that's moving over to Gutenberg, so it's definitely worth paying attention to. And
Absolutely.
that means that Simon's advice can be more or less ignored because WordPress will do it for us.
Hopefully.
Depends what theme you use.
Yeah, that's actually really good. But I did an article about HTML5 on Semrush, and I actually took a screenshot of WordPress, and the default editor does a lot of the HTML5 stuff for you, which I found brilliant. But then you can't rely on it, especially once you get these themes. And if you're going to pay, we come back to that, $20 for a theme, it's clear that they haven't put an awful lot of effort into it, and that it isn't going to be brilliant. Themes are a big weakness at the same time as being a big strength. Themes are really the design thing, the quark. We're looking at design, we think, oh, that looks really pretty, but people tend not to worry too much about the way it's being presented in HTML5, IA, or accessibility, and that's a really big pity because WordPress often falls down on that.
It's not just WordPress either, is it, Jason? It's anything that's got a WYSIWYG editor in it allows the clients to go mad, and they just pick headings to be whatever size they want. And I've seen some awful things because of WYSIWYG editors. And the problem is, if you don't have a WYSIWYG editor and you cut all your content up into fields, then there's very little flexibility for the web page. So it's a real close ding dong between the two. And just so that everybody knows that WordPress isn't the only content management system in the world, I use Craft and Perch, and they use blocks like that. And some sites I build blocks where it literally is just a heading or subheading and stuff. And other ones I use WYSIWYG fields for bits and pieces. And it depends on the content. It depends what you're trying to do. So.
Sure. Yeah, great stuff. I mean, another thing, William Rock mentioned that he's been in the industry, he's watching today, since 1997. It looks like we've all been in the industry far too long. And we've seen the growth, and you were talking earlier on about tables going out of fashion, coming back into fashion, that divs are a part of the way to encompass content. I've lived through all that, and you guys have lived through all that. And I think that experience is really useful in terms of being able to forget all the stuff we used to know is incredibly important, and sometimes we fail to do that. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can find myself thinking about things that were 10 years ago that come back, and I think, oh, that's really important. And in fact, it isn't important at all. The other thing that comes back in the chat, I've been just reading through it, so which is why I'm a little bit distracted, is how much trouble we all have convincing our clients to do all of this from the get-go, from when they're actually designing the site, and not just ask us to come in and repair it once they've launched. A very quick word from each of you on that, and then we can end the session. Jono, what's your biggest beef about clients coming in too late to sort out IA?
Oh, that it's every project ever, because nobody is only just building their first website now. They all already have one, and it's full of bugs and it's full of errors, and it wasn't well designed and it didn't have a great IA. So they go, great, we're going to get a new one. And somebody very senior says, okay, here are the requirements, here's the budget, and I want it in 3 weeks. And it all goes wrong. I wrote a blog post on moz.com about this, saying there's no such thing as a migration. They all say we're doing a migration project. And what they actually mean is they're building a new website. And of course, because they're not experts, they don't understand the depth of requirements for accessibility now, etc. So they under budget, they understaff it, they mess up the timetables, and then you're stuck. And I can't see a world where this doesn't just keep happening, which is deeply depressing.
Yeah, no, the whole thing, we're building a new website and we're going to migrate it, but we under budget the actual building of the website. Then sometimes they mess up the migration too. And that whole under budgeting, I mean, Kim was talking, so we can move on to Kim for this last little word. You were talking about the fact that people under budget as well earlier on in terms of accessibility. They don't do the research, they don't know who they're aiming at, and they don't know the devices and the type of person that they need to serve. So you've got the same beef? You're muted. Okay, move on to Simon. Have you got the same beef?
Yeah, exactly the same as Jono. I've spent a lot of time trying to persuade departments in HSBC for many years that they should put the resource and cost in, but normally they were vanity projects, and I had marketeers who were in and out of jobs quicker than the actual time it would take to launch a new site. I mean, sometimes it take up a couple of years, maybe 3 years, to actually redo a site if it's done properly in big corporates like that. When I'm doing it myself, it takes weeks and I forget everything. I can go back and start again. But with big companies like that, it's very, very difficult, and small companies as well, very difficult to try and persuade them to get that extra spend on resource to get it all right. But the benefits are just huge.
Yeah.
It's setting the stall at the beginning and say, this is what you need to do to get there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and Kim just made a comment. Search engines don't have credit cards, people do. Brilliant stuff. Kim, try talking again. If we can't hear you, if you agree with them, just go like this. Just go like this. Or like that. Thank you, everybody. That was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I'm going to watch it again later on this afternoon, try and get all that in my head. Thank you, Jono. Thank you, Kim. And thank you, Simon. Thank you also, Anton. Wonderful. Please don't forget that next Tuesday, we've got another episode. It's episode 6, How to Help Google and Amazon Make Sense of a Chaotic Unstructured Web, with Martha, Aaron, and Arnout. I'm really interested in this one because I've got no idea what I'm going to ask them. We all made the title up together, and so I'm going to start my research seriously today. I'm going to come up with some great questions because these are 3 stunningly good experts, just like the 3 experts we had today. Thank you for coming along, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you.